I am 64 years old, and exactly 17 days before my daughter's wedding, she emailed me 5 conditions I had to obey if I wanted a seat in the ballroom. I read the list twice while sitting alone at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee. First, I had to pay $20,000 to cover the remaining balance for her luxury catering. Second, I was to hand over the keys to my late husband's vintage Mercedes so her groom could use it for the getaway drive. Third, I had to wear a plain beige dress and sit in the back row to avoid clashing with the visual aesthetic. Fourth, I needed to apologize to her fiancé's wealthy parents for my working-class background. Finally, I was never to mention the money she had secretly drained from my savings account. At the bottom of the screen, Sarah had typed, "Complete all 5 and we'll let you come." She thought the deadline would frighten me into submission. She believed I would do anything to avoid the shame of missing my only daughter's wedding. Instead, the email clarified everything. I did not cry. I did not call her to argue or beg for a compromise. I simply opened a new tab on my computer and typed 4 words in reply: "I decline all 5." After hitting send, I booked a luxury beach suite in Malibu for the wedding weekend. Then I found an elegant walnut box in my study and began preparing one final gift. Sarah had turned her wedding into a 300-person performance. She had already instructed the master of ceremonies to announce every expensive present from her new wealthy in-laws on a live stream. She expected me to cave. She assumed that box would hold the car keys and a massive check. What she did not know was that my gift contained no jewelry and no cash. It held a simple piece of everyday technology and a stack of paper. Before I tell you what she heard and what happened when that box was opened, I want you to know exactly how we reached this point. My daughter Sarah always had a taste for a life I could not afford to give her. I spent 30 years working as a high school science teacher. It was an honest, quiet life. My late husband and I built a cozy home, paid off our mortgage, and saved our pennies carefully for retirement. Sarah hated the quiet. She wanted the spotlight designer labels and exclusive invitations. When she met Greg, everything escalated rapidly. Greg came from a family of commercial real estate developers. They flew first-class owned summer homes and wore clothes that cost more than my first car. To fit into his world, Sarah created a fictional version of herself. She told Greg she was a highly successful freelance consultant with a healthy trust fund. She painted me as an eccentric, stubborn woman who chose to live simply despite having immense family wealth. I let her tell her little stories. I figured she was just insecure and wanted to impress him. But the lies required constant funding. Years ago, I had opened a joint bank account with Sarah to help her manage her college expenses and early rent. I deposited money every month, trusting she used it responsibly for emergencies. I never scrutinized the statements because I believed my daughter. When the wedding planning started, Sarah began demanding more. She wanted imported flowers, a custom gown, and a 10-tier cake. I told her I could not contribute beyond the $5,000 I had already gifted them. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and promised she had it completely under control. She did not have it under control. She had my debit card. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the local grocery store buying ingredients for a beef stew. I swiped my personal card and the machine beeped loudly. Insufficient funds. I stared at the screen, entirely confused. I had over $30,000 in that account. Or at least I did the week before. I left my groceries at the register and walked directly to my car. I drove straight to my local bank branch. The teller, a sweet young woman who knew me by name, printed my recent transaction history. My stomach tightened as I scanned the pages. $6,000 to a luxury bridal boutique. $4,500 for a photographer's deposit. $8,000 to a high-end florist. All authorized by Sarah transferring money from my primary savings into our old joint account, and then draining it dry. I did not make a scene. I did not break down in tears or call the authorities. I calmly asked the teller to close the joint account immediately. I then opened a brand new account under my name, only transferred my remaining pension funds over, and canceled every card attached to my identity. When I got home, I immediately called a locksmith and changed the locks on my front door. The fallout took less than 48 hours. My phone buzzed loudly on Thursday morning. It was Sarah. "Mom, the caterer just tried to run my card for the deposit and it declined. Did you do something to the account?" She screamed through the speaker, panic lacing her voice. I poured my morning coffee, watching the steam rise. "I closed it, Sarah. You took $20,000 without asking. I was going to pay you back," she yelled, her voice echoing off my kitchen tiles. "Greg's parents are covering the honeymoon. I just needed cash flow. You're ruining my wedding." "Your wedding is not my financial burden," I replied smoothly. "Do not touch my money again." She hung up on me. She thought a silent treatment would break my resolve. She thought the pressure of the approaching wedding and the fear of public embarrassment would force me to open my wallet. She severely underestimated me. I spent the next week enjoying my garden, ignoring her passive-aggressive social media posts about toxic family members. I thought establishing that boundary was the end of it. Then the ultimatum arrived. Sarah's email with the 5 conditions landed in my inbox a week later. She was entirely desperate. Greg's family expected a certain caliber of event, and without my stolen funds, Sarah could not pay the caterer. She demanded the $20,000 as a gift to replace what she couldn't access. She demanded my husband's car to impress Greg's father. She wanted me hidden in beige, apologizing for my existence, and entirely silent about her theft. That afternoon, my son Mark stopped by my house. Mark is a good man, but he has always avoided conflict, preferring to keep the peace at all costs. "Mom, she's losing her mind." Mark sighed, sitting heavily at my kitchen table. "Greg's family is putting a lot of pressure on her. Can't you just give her a little something to smooth things over? It's her big day. You don't want to miss it." I looked at my son, sliding a cup of tea toward him. "Mark, she stole from my retirement. Now she is demanding I pay for the privilege of being insulted at a party. Does that sound like something I should attend?" Mark rubbed his temples, staring at his tea. "No, but she's family. You know how she gets." "Being family does not grant a free pass for exploitation," I stated firmly. "I will not be there." Mark nodded slowly, recognizing the finality in my tone. He didn't push further. Sarah assumed I would cave. In her mind, mothers always sacrificed. Mothers always absorbed the pain to keep the peace. But I was done being a shock absorber for her arrogance. I realized that simply staying away wasn't enough. Sarah was building a marriage on a mountain of lies, using my money to fake a lifestyle. Greg was arrogant, but he didn't deserve a financial parasite. More importantly, I refused to let Sarah control the narrative of my absence. I walked into my study, opened the closet, and pulled out the walnut box. I wanted the gift to be undeniable. I did not need formal investigations. I only needed reality. First, I printed the bank statements, highlighting every unauthorized transfer Sarah had made. I used a bright red marker to circle the exorbitant purchases, the champagne towers, the designer shoes, the custom ice sculptures. I clipped them together neatly. Next, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small, inexpensive digital tablet I normally used for reading recipes in the kitchen. I charged the battery fully. Months ago, before I noticed the missing money, Sarah had left me an accidental voicemail. She had pocket-dialed me while sitting in a cafe with her maid of honor. The recording was crystal clear. I transferred that specific audio file onto the tablet and set it as the only icon on the screen. I wrote a small handwritten note on a piece of heavy cardstock. Press play before reviewing the ledger. I placed the tablet, the note, and the bank statements inside the walnut box. I closed the lid and tied it shut with an elegant ivory ribbon. It looked exactly like the kind of luxury heirloom gift Greg's family would expect. I did not feel vindictive. I felt incredibly light. I was merely returning the truth she had tried to hide. I drove to the post office and shipped the box directly to the wedding planner's attention at the venue with strict instructions that it was a legacy gift, meant for the grand pre-ceremony presentation. Sarah had emailed the planner to ensure my gift was opened last, still believing it contained the keys to the Mercedes and a heavy check. She wanted the maximum audience for my surrender. I gave her exactly what she asked for. Leaving the post office, I drove straight to the airport. My flight to California was waiting. I arrived in Malibu 2 days before the wedding. The beach suite was everything the brochure promised: vast windows, white linen sofas, and a private balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. There were no stressful dress fittings, no screaming over seating charts, no passive-aggressive comments from in-laws about the quality of the hors d'oeuvres. I woke up, walked barefoot on the warm sand, and ate fresh seafood. On the day of the wedding, I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and set my laptop on the balcony table. Sarah had arranged for a professional live stream of the pre-wedding legacy gift ceremony. It was a 40-minute event held in the venue's grand ballroom, meant to accommodate wealthy relatives who couldn't travel, and more accurately to show off her hall. At exactly 4 o'clock, the stream went live. The ballroom was dripping in white roses and crystal chandeliers. 300 guests sat at round tables sipping champagne. On the stage, Sarah and Greg sat on ornate velvet chairs. Sarah looked stunning in a gown I had unknowingly paid for. Greg looked proud, holding her hand. Right in the center of the presentation table, sitting on a velvet cushion, was my walnut box. The ivory ribbon gleamed under the harsh stage lights. I took a sip of my tea. The ocean breeze ruffled my hair. I felt completely detached from the opulent room on my screen. I wasn't an embarrassed mother sitting in the back row in a beige dress. I was a free woman sitting by the sea. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, welcoming the guests. We gather today to honor the joining of 2 families and to present the couple with tokens of legacy and love. The show was about to begin. The ceremony progressed exactly as Sarah had designed it, a relentless parade of wealth. Greg's parents walked up first, presenting the couple with the deed to a small summer cabin. Polite applause rippled through the room. Next, an aunt gifted a set of antique silver. Mark walked up quietly and handed them a beautifully framed photograph of our ancestors. Sarah smiled graciously at everyone performing the role of the humble, blessed bride, perfectly. But her eyes kept darting to the walnut box in the center of the table. She was eagerly waiting for her triumph. Finally, the master of ceremonies stepped to the center of the stage. Our final tribute comes from the bride's mother, Nancy. The MC announced his voice, booming through the speakers and my laptop. Though she could not be with us today, she sent this special legacy gift. A murmur moved through the ballroom. People leaned in, whispering to their neighbors. Sarah stood up, smoothing the front of her gown. She looked directly at the live stream camera, wearing a soft, practiced smile. "My mother and I have a complicated relationship," she told the crowd, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But I know deep down she wants what is best for us. I accept her gift with an open heart." I rested my chin on my hand, watching her performance. It was almost impressive how easily she lied. Sarah reached the table and pulled the ivory ribbon. It fell away smoothly. She opened the lid of the walnut box, fully expecting to pull out a set of car keys to dangle in front of Greg's parents. Instead, she looked down and froze. The camera zoomed in slightly. I saw her brow furrow as she stared at the digital tablet and the stack of red-marked papers. "What is it, honey?" Greg asked, stepping up behind her, putting a supportive hand on her waist. Sarah quickly tried to close the lid. Nothing, just a private letter. I'll read it later. But Greg reached past her. There's a note. It says, press play. No, don't. Sarah snapped her carefully crafted smile, vanishing instantly. She grabbed for the tablet, but Greg had already picked it up and tapped the only icon on the screen. The MC, trying to be helpful and keep the show going, leaned the microphone closer to the tablet so the whole room could hear. Sarah's own voice blasted through the ballroom speakers, echoing sharply off the crystal chandeliers. I know. The recorded Sarah laughed. Mom's going to flip when she sees the account, but who cares? Greg thinks I have a trust fund. If I don't pay for this caterer, his family will know I'm completely broke. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped midair. On the screen, Greg's face drained of color. The audio continued. I'll just pay her back eventually when we're married and I have access to Greg's money. She's just an old teacher, she doesn't need it anyway. She'll get over it. Sarah shrieked. Turn it off. Shut it off now. She lunged at Greg, knocking the walnut box off the table. The ledger spilled across the stage floor. Bright red circles highlighted my stolen savings, $6,000. For the boutique, $8,000 for the florist. Greg ignored her screaming. He bent down and picked up the bank statements. He stared at the name at the top, Nancy Crawford. He looked at the negative balances. You stole from your mother. Greg asked, his voice low but carrying perfectly through the quiet room. Sarah was hyperventilating, tears ruining her perfect makeup. Greg, please, it's out of context. She's crazy. She set me up. This is a bank statement, Sarah. Greg replied sharply. You told me you paid for this wedding with your business earnings. You told me your mother was a hoarder who wouldn't support you. Sarah reached for his arm. I did it for us, to fit in with your family. Greg stepped back, pulling his arm away as if she had burned him. Greg looked around the ballroom. 300 guests were staring at them in stunned silence. His parents looked absolutely horrified. He looked back at Sarah, clutching the bank statements. The truth was simply laid bare in front of everyone she had tried to impress. There is no us, Greg said coldly. He unpinned the white rose boutonniere from his tuxedo jacket and dropped it onto the scattered papers on the floor. The wedding is off. Sarah let out a sound of pure terror. It wasn't fear of violence. It was the utter destruction of her carefully curated facade. She grabbed his jacket, begging him to stay, promising she could explain everything if they just went to a private room. Greg shook his head, turned away, and walked down the steps of the stage. His parents immediately stood up and followed him toward the exit without a backward glance. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into loud arguments. Guests began standing up, grabbing their purses and coats, eager to escape the disaster. The illusion was entirely shattered. Sarah collapsed into one of the ornate velvet chairs, sobbing into her hands. The wedding planner rushed the stage wildly, motioning for the camera crew to cut the feed. The screen on my laptop went black. I sat in the silence of my Malibu balcony. I did not cheer. I did not laugh. I just took a long, deep breath of the salty ocean air. I felt a profound sense of relief. I had not framed her. I had simply stepped out of the way and let the consequences of her own actions catch up to her. She had built her entire future on the assumption that I would quietly fund her lies to protect her image. When I removed my money and my silence gravity did the rest, the aftermath was swift and highly practical. Because Greg and his family left and Sarah had no money of her own, the venue demanded immediate payment for the catering and the open bar. Sarah tried to give them my old card. It declined. She was forced to take out a high-interest personal loan just to avoid being sued by the angry vendors. She had to move out of the luxury apartment she shared with Greg and into a tiny, cramped studio on the edge of town. Her freelance business dried up almost immediately once Greg's family cut off her networking access. Mark called me a few days later. He told me the whole family was in shock, but nobody blamed me. He finally understood why I had drawn such a hard line. He apologized for asking me to yield. I accepted his apology warmly, and we promised to have dinner when I returned. Sarah texted me exactly once. "You ruined my life. I hope you're happy." I didn't block her, but I didn't reply. I simply deleted the message. I wasn't happy she was struggling, but I was deeply happy that I was no longer responsible for it. I stayed in Malibu for the full weekend. I walked the beach, read books, and slept better than I had in years. When I returned to my quiet house, it felt completely mine again. The changed locks stayed. Some people might say a mother should always protect her child. But true protection isn't allowing someone to steal your future to build a fake one of their own. I took back my boundaries, my finances, and my peace. My daughter demanded 5 conditions to let me into her life. I realized I didn't need to meet any of them because I held the keys to my own all along.